Hi, Glenn here. I don't know that I've ever started the talk quite this way before, but things aren't actually going that well for me at the moment. And I know that I'm not the only one who has sorts of things going on that I'll share with you in a moment. But of course that doesn't really help. But maybe what I have to say will be helpful, and that's why I've decided to do this video, because I don't actually like sharing the sorts of things that I'm going to be talking about, but there are some other things that I'll say that I do like and may be useful. So if you watch this channel, or have in the past, you'll know that some months ago now I spoke about ADHD, and I talked about how the way that I'm able to work was a real blessing. My self-employment, working in IT, gave me a lot of flexibility, and it can be quite good work as well. But well, the short story is, even at the time of me making that video, work was starting to dwindle quite a lot, and well, that's continued since then, to the point where for a little while now I've been unemployed. And because I've been out of work more than I've been in work this year, the savings that we had to be used for everyday living costs. They got eaten through pretty quickly, and well, yeah, like I said, things aren't particularly good. My situation isn't a good one, and I haven't been able to land my next job, and I really need that to change, like within the next couple of weeks. That's where things are at. The number of jobs in my field appearing on a weekly basis is slowly starting to rise. There was a time, some months ago when it was pretty bleak, but not just here in New Zealand, but in many countries the market is pretty unforgiving at the moment, and the number of applicants for one role is just enormous, in ways that are much worse than they have been in years gone by. And believe me, I'm sending out a lot of applications, but well, hasn't happened yet. Now, of course, I still hope to monetize this channel. I'd like to spend more time creating content and sharing it with you. But now that I'm not working, you might think, well, you've got more time. Well, yes and no, because I'm investing a lot of energy in trying to change my work situation. So I can't just spend all my time out here in the workshop working on projects and making videos about mental health and uploading it and trying to boost my numbers, because that doesn't pay the bills. It's kind of a vicious circle, isn't it? Vicious cycle. Yes, I think cycle is the thing. Yeah, so I can't devote my time to doing the things that I'm really interested in because I have to get back into a job. I'm also kind of terrible at monetizing myself in general. I have a lot of skills, but being an entrepreneur isn't really one of them. Especially when it comes to content like this, I don't know how to ask for or obtain support. There are some people who would just sit there reacting to songs or movies and then say, hit me up on my Patreon, and I'm like, for what? But even when I create what I think is good content, I have a hard time doing that. Not that I have a Patreon, and I want everyone to have everything good that I do for nothing, because I think it's good content and I think some of it's helpful, and that's just my attitude to everything. So anyway, that's what's happening in my world. In that same earlier video that I referred to on ADHD, I talked about the things that I'm prioritizing. I talked about having a plan and arranging your life around your goals. And among my top two were, well, work, because it's unavoidable. Before all else, meet your obligations, and also my family, and especially my wife, and giving her the life the best life that I can. So I'm not exactly nailing my top priorities at the moment, am I? No, not really. I don't want to be misunderstood. I would not have recorded this video just to tell you about the troubles that I'm having. Some people might do that, but no, I'm not generally an exhibitionist about my hardships, and there is a degree of shame, well, for me anyway, involved in this kind of hardship. I want to talk to you for quite natural reasons about depression, for your sake and not for mine. Although I will use myself as an example because it doesn't seem appropriate to use anybody else. Just like when I talked about ADHD, what I'll do is I'll share a little bit about myself, not too much. I don't assume that you're interested in my story, and then I'll turn the spotlight onto you and ask you to think about yourself and your life. So I think that I'm a reasonably self-aware person. I have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in here. Well, and not perfectly, because I know that we all have huge blind spots when it comes to understanding ourselves, but I think I do okay. Comparatively, maybe. And I also know a bit about how psychiatric issues are diagnosed, although I have to add my caveat that I'm not a clinical psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, or anything like that. I'm a psychology student, and I'm just a guy who's interested in these issues. But I have some understanding of how those things work. There have been times in my life where, and I have told this to people in the past, times in my life where I'm quite comfortable saying that if a psychiatrist or someone else who could diagnose me was in an office with me, going through the checklist of symptoms in the DSM, that's the textbook that provides the taxonomy, the list of psychiatric conditions and their symptoms, I think their diagnostic manual would tell them that I would meet the criteria for either major depressive disorder or persistent depressive disorder, the two things that are usually referred to as depression. I think I would have been diagnosed. But the question I want to put to you is, should I have been diagnosed? It's a bit moot now because I didn't seek assessment, so I wasn't diagnosed. But it's still a worthwhile question for us to consider because it's not just about me. One of the complaints that some experts make about manuals of diagnosis like the DSM is that it does this thing called over-pathologizing people. A pathology is a disease, an illness, and so this complaint is that the DSM categorizes people who are actually quite normal as having a disease or a condition. And so I want you to join me in this thought experiment. I want you to suppose that you were a guy who was generally doing okay, mentally speaking, and then you became sick. And then after a couple of doctor's visits, you learned that you had bowel cancer and it was terminal and you were going to die in the next 6 months. Just imagine being in that position for a moment and then ask the question, how would you feel? Now, maybe a silly question. You don't really know how a person like that would feel unless you were actually in that situation, and I hope you never are. So it's hard to say, but I think most of us at least would say that person would probably be very sad, they would be worried, they would be afraid. They might even now meet the criteria, the diagnostic criteria for a major depressive disorder or some sort of anxiety disorder. But do you think they should be diagnosed as having one of those conditions? Because surely that is how a mentally normal person would feel under those terrible circumstances. Yes, they may feel depressed. Yes, they may feel anxious. But It's not that they have a condition called depression or anxiety, is it? I guess I'm asking you, is it? What do you think? I actually think they feel this way quite understandably because they have cancer and they're going to die soon, not because they have some condition. Well, here's another one for you to imagine. I want you to suppose that you're a man who would otherwise be mentally normal, who finds himself in a situation where he's really poor, like he's just got no money, and he has a wife and young children, like I used to have, and he can provide so little for them. And he has a job, but he just hates it, and it doesn't pay very well at all. And he's investing a lot of time and energy trying to get a better job, and he knows he's capable of much more rewarding work, let alone better paying work, but he's just not having any success. Now, how do you think a person like that is going to feel? A man who's in that set of circumstances, if he is stuck there for years, say 10 years in that situation, he feels trapped. Well, he's not going to feel great, is he? He may even feel depressed. But again, I put the question to you, should he be diagnosed as having a condition called depression? Or instead, should his circumstances be described as depressing? You may think that's a subtle distinction. I think it's an important distinction. And we might disagree here. Let me know if that's the case. When it comes to this whole question of pathologizing, of describing people as having this or that condition, I want to quote from a source that I read this week. And typically, I won't name people that I'm quoting from, and the reason for that is that you may have heard of this person or that person, and you might not like them, and I don't want, or you might like them, and I don't want people to react to the personalities that they're like. I just want people to consider the thoughts. So I'm going to quote this source that I read a couple of days ago. This fellow says, "The DSM tends to ignore contextual factors in the development of symptoms and disorders. Some professionals have suggested a replacement of current diagnostic labels with descriptors such as the consequences of poverty, the consequences of violence, the effects of homelessness and racism, or the damage done by interpersonal discriminatory treatment." Now, never mind just now what you think about the particular labels that he chose. You can see the point, right? So often, these are not sick people. In fact, I'll just go ahead and say we are perfectly normal people reacting in perfectly normal ways to situations that are just really hard. One of the problems with being told that you feel the way you do because there's this disease that you have is that it can put the solution beyond your reach, I think is the way to put that. Because you're sick. There's nothing you can do about it while you're sick. You can't just put good habits into place to get out of an illness. You have this pathology, and that's the issue. And that can be quite a harmful effect. This is a thought that I've seen expressed by a number of people who know the subject of mental health much better than I do, and which has occurred to me before because of circumstances that I've found myself in. Here's a quote from a particularly well-known psychologist who, again I won't name, reflecting on his experience with clients. "You can walk through someone's life and find out if they are reasonably embedded in a hierarchy of social institutions. If they are not, no intimate partner, no family, no children, no friends, no job, no career, no educational pathway, no engagement in civic responsibility, no church attendance, no spiritual life, no routine, then they're not depressed. They just have a horrible life, multidimensionally. It's no wonder they think they are depressed. There's nothing in their life that is working. But that is not exactly a diagnosis at the level of the individual. It is a diagnosis of the relationship between the individual and the structure containing social institutions. If you do not have an intimate partner, a family, any friends, a career, a job, any civic involvement, or any involvement with religious institutions, and no creative striving, all you have left is pain. That is what you have. Now, if you're familiar with the person who said that, whether you've heard this quote before, you might recognize his voice in those words. But there's a hugely important truth here. When I look back on my life at the periods when I would say that I've been at my lowest mentally, here's what I think was happening. I was experiencing what I have long described as irrational and highly emotively driven doubts about things that I knew to be true, or the things that I still now believe to be true about God and about life. And I recognized at the time that those feelings were just feelings and not rational criticisms. I had spent years of my life, like a very long time, accumulating qualifications and experiences all the way up to a PhD, conference addresses, publications, and so on, towards the goal of a career in academia, only to realize that just because of the realities of the market and to an extent the ideological forces at work in academic institutions, that was just not going to happen, ever. And I had to start over as a man in my early 30s. Also, for some years, I was stuck in jobs that I just didn't want, which made very little use of my skills or my interests. Even though I was good at them, they didn't pay very well at all, and they didn't enable me to provide the life for my family, not just that I wanted to, but which I believed that I ought to. My kids will say pretty bluntly, we were poor when I was little. I don't object to them saying that because it's true, but I find myself saying, yeah, and I'm the reason you were poor, which is not fantastic. It happened quickly when it happened, when I tumbled into this headspace where within the space of just a few days, actually. It doesn't take long to suddenly realize that the way you are thinking and feeling has changed. And not surprisingly, the times when I've been at my best have been the times when it seemed like everything was going well. And that would be the way, wouldn't it? We got our own home. My career, although not my first choice, was going well. It was gradually progressing. I was gaining seniority, more skills, certainly more money, which is always a good thing. I even started to work on some of the issues that I was having trouble with, like focus and attention. As I said, I got the diagnosis in ADHD. I had the headspace to start improving myself because I didn't have these other issues going on. I picked up some creative hobbies, like some that you will be familiar with if you watch this channel. I started hanging around with some interesting people, relatively small group, but that's the way I roll. I don't like lots of people around. So I made some changes in my life to enable me to work better and other things. In other words, when your life's going well, you feel well. you feel good. You've got stuff to be happy about, to be excited about, things to look forward to. But now, over the last little while, I'm still a homeowner for now. I'm retraining in psychology. I have some interesting outlets, including this channel. I'm embedded in the life of our local church. I have a very small circle of friends, a couple of whom I should actually catch up with again quite soon. That would be a good thing to do. I have an overall fairly positive view of the direction in which my life is heading. And so some things are much better. But now, after a fairly rapid decline in circumstances, I'm, as I said, completely out of work in a very difficult job market. Financially, things are dire. There's no point in pretending otherwise. And in a short space of time, that's going to have some consequences for my life if I can't turn things around, well, as I mentioned earlier, in the next couple of weeks. So that's tense. Oh, and just as an extra nice touch, because I've been at home not working, applying for as many jobs as I can, the last little while, with the market being what it is, I'm getting a whole lot of rejection emails coming my way, which, you should expect, but still, that's not pleasant either. So how does, I talked about those other situations that I asked you to imagine yourself in. How does a fairly normal person feel in circumstances like these? Well, possibly quite depressed and anxious. And although those aren't good feelings, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's nothing bad about the fact that a person feels that way in those circumstances. It makes sense. Should they be diagnosed as having psychological problems because of how they feel and the impact that those feelings are having on a day-to-day basis? Well, and maybe there's room for disagreement there, but I think probably not. And I should say, too, that I'm nothing like I used to be. I just manage better these days. I wasn't terrible back in those days. I was somewhat resilient given the things that were going on, but I would say that I'm a very resilient person now, and for whatever reason, it doesn't get to me, even though the risk of the situation that I'm in seems greater. I just manage better. I doubt that I would be diagnosed with anything new, but, well, it doesn't feel great, as you can imagine. So that's me. What about you? I'd be very keen to stop talking about me, actually, and start talking about you and people generally. Maybe just now you're doing great, or just fine, and I hope you are. That's my preference for you, for what it's worth. Or maybe in the past you've lived through periods of depression, so you know the kinds of things that I'm talking about. Or maybe things are not fine for you right now, and if that's the case, then I'm sorry to hear that. Not that I heard it, but I think it's great that in the last couple of decades, last 20 or 30 years, there's been a much greater awareness of mental health issues, especially depression, it seems to me, and a much greater openness to talking about those things and dealing with those things. I mean, that's all very positive. We can be thankful that that's the case. But one of the things that goes along with that is this idea that it's totally a good term to, possibly on a long-term basis, be going to therapy or taking medication for mental health problems if that's what you need. Now, I'm not telling you that nobody ever needs that. I wouldn't say that, because that would be very unwise and not very responsible. It may be that there are people who do need that. But in the minds of a lot of people, that's what doing the work looks like. Like going to therapy and taking meds if you need them. That's doing the work. That's not doing the work. And that's not helped, I think, by even some of what professionals might say about looking after your mental health. The popular notion that if you're depressed, it's because you have a chemical imbalance that needs fixing has a lot to answer for. There was never a scientific basis for using that language, and it's harmful. Doing the work is much bigger than that, than therapy and drugs, as good as they might be in some circumstances. If you find yourself depressed, and obviously so, then you need to look at your life and ask some questions. What is your social world like? Do you have one? Like, do you think of yourself as having a social world, social life? Is most of your life, when you're not working, spent playing online games or watching videos? Is that your social world? Do you have a significant other? And if not, is that a big issue for you? Do you find yourself thinking about the fact that you wish you had a significant other? Are you having financial trouble? Are you involved in any organizations at all, whether religious or otherwise? But if they are religious ones, have you spoken with your pastor, your priest, or whoever it might be about how you're feeling? Do you have hobbies? What's your diet, and what is your physical health like? How often do you leave the house? What's your relationship with your job like? Do you have any plans, like at all? Whether it's career plans, study plans, even upcoming travel plans, or just plans with anyone to do anything. Now, I know, as I was preparing the things that I was going to say, I thought to myself, like, I can see that to an extent there may be a chicken and egg type situation here. If you are really struggling mentally, then having someone tell you that you need to make plans or go out and face people could be frustrating, because that's beyond you. And so you might sit there and think, man, that's really unhelpful. And yeah, I know that sometimes that may be the case. And please remember, I just want to say again, I'm not saying that you don't need to, or that you shouldn't seek professional help. Sometimes that may be a very wise idea. In particular, if you are having thoughts about harming yourself, then tell someone as soon as you can. Right? So I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying this is all just a DIY job. You don't need help. No, maybe you do. However, if you find yourself giving answers to those questions that I put to you earlier, and you recognize that those answers aren't healthy ones, and be honest, you know whether they are or not, then it could actually just be that you're not sick. Your life just sucks. And you could change at least some of those circumstances in ways that will make you happier, will make you feel healthier and better. Just one example. Guys, if you're someone who finds it therapeutic to be in the workshop, not like anyone I know, working on projects, then see if there's an organisation where guys get together in workshops near you. There are actually organisations like that. Here in New Zealand, there's one called the Men's Shed. There are a couple in my part of the world. I'll share a link. I don't know how widespread that organisation is, but it's just an example. I'll share a link in the notes below. And if you're in New Zealand, take a look. But that's just one example. Once upon a time, I found it incredible. I thought it was bizarre that there were these things called life coaches. I might have thought, well, someone's getting paid to tell rich fools how to live. What a racket. And I was wrong. If you're not directing your life well just now, and you don't have a wise person who might be a mentor for you in your life, then maybe what you need isn't a psychiatrist and a prescription for pills, but maybe what you need is some help in making better decisions and building a richer life that will make you healthier in the long term. That may be what you need. Or it might just be that for some things, like work, that you're having some genuinely bad luck and there's not much you can do except keep chipping away at the problem, as I am right now, because you can't control all of your circumstances. Don't hear me saying that whatever trouble you're having is just because of bad decisions you made. No, that's not true. But when you're down, I guess the point is, when you're down, ask why. I'm talking about when you feel depressed. I'm not talking about other symptoms like specific intrusive thoughts about harmful behavior or things like behavioral issues that you have or the use of various substances. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the feeling that we naturally call depression. Is it because you're sick or you have a condition? Well, I'm not saying no, but I am saying that in many cases, probably not. And if you want to be a person who's doing better, then look at how you might start building the life of that person that you want to be. You might be down, but that doesn't mean that you are down with the sickness, for what it's worth.